Hi, I'm Catherine Llewellyn, the host of the podcast. You can find out all about Truth and Transcendence on truthandtranscendence.com. And you can find out all about me on beingspace.world, where you will find my online coaching offering, as well as my UK-based workshops. The Freedom of Spirit workshop for liberation and empowerment, the Pellower Radical Shift in Consciousness workshop for spiritual expansion, and transformational coaching for exploring the mind-body-spirit connection on the expansive path. You can also support the podcast by actually making a donation. I hope you enjoy the show. Welcome to Truth and Transcendence. You can find all our episodes on truthandtranscendence.com. So today I'm excited to welcome special guest Tom Hodgkinson, who is here today to talk about freedom and other things as well. And freedom is important right now because freedom is always important. And I think any of my listeners know that's what I think by now. So Tom is the author and founder of the Idler magazine. He's written several books, including How to Be Idle and How to Be Free, and has recently released issue 100 of the Idler. So, someone's made a living out of idleness, which I think that in and of itself made me want to meet Tom. So, Tom, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure. So, we talked about coming in with a theme of freedom, which you were saying is something that's always been important to you. Can you, if you cast your mind back, can you remember the first time that you realized that freedom was very important to you?
Well, I suppose as a child, I didn't like being told what to do and sort of controlled. I mean, I had a fun childhood, no doubt about that. But I enjoyed growing older because I had more autonomy. And I think, like most children do, I can't wait till I'm grown up so I can be the boss and I don't have to be told what to do. So probably like most children, you start to realize that, maybe at school, at a fairly early age, like sort of 8 or 9, that you want to be free. And it's as you said, it's such a sort of common theme in life, isn't it? And it's a common theme because a lot of people feel, I think, trapped. The idea for the Idler came much later when I had my first job, and it was my second job. My first job was working at a record shop and skateboarding shop in 1990, rough trade in London, which was, although I was kind of trapped in a shop all day, we had these sort of elements of freedom. And it's actually quite fun working in a shop with a mate, behind the counter. And you can give each other little breaks and look after the shop for half an hour while the other one goes out for tea or something. And then I started working at a magazine, a tabloid magazine, the Sunday Mirror magazine supplement, as a journalist, because that's what I am. I'm a hack. And that I found constraining. I wasn't really enjoying the kind of what I felt to be the sort of semi-slavery of office life. And I've read a lot of magazines and fanzines on this subject, and it's a subject in pop music, it's a subject in books, it's in the Russian novels, it's in George Orwell. This idea that you go through school and possibly university, and then you're sort of dumped into the job market, and you get a job, and then you're like, this isn't actually that great, I'm feeling a little bit like a slave, and I'm not doing the things that I really want to do. So the Idler magazine was really started for those people who felt a bit dissatisfied with the system, if you like, really, and the 9 to 5 and whatever you want to call it. It's been given many different names over the millennia, hasn't it? So Caesar, Jesus called it Caesar. Render thy taxes unto Caesar. It's a subject in science fiction. There was a writer, William Cobbett, I love, in the early 19th century. He called it the thing. This sort of, and now people call it, the conspiratorial element. Would call it something like the liberal elite or something like that. But
yes,
I'm not sure if there's any one particular person who's created it. It's almost self-created. We're all complicit in the creation of this thing. So the question is, can you sort of escape from the thing, if you want to escape from the thing, because it's quite comfortable, it can be. If you do want to escape from it, how do you do it? And I think being idle and being lazy is a sort of form of resistance to, if you like, the system. So that's why we came up with the idea of a magazine called The Idler. It was also a reference to Dr. Johnson, one of my favourite writers from the 18th century, who was really lazy but very productive. So on a personal level, I wanted to explore that idea that idling and creativity are very much intertwined. One leads to the other. At the same time, look at a kind of anarchistic worldview. Can we sort of break free of the chains that hold us back, whether they're created by society or whether they're created in our own minds?
Absolutely, yeah. Great. So you were connected to the fact that you wanted to be free when you were a child, and then you somehow ended up getting a job later on. And was there some sort of sense when you went off and got a job, did you expect it to be fun, or did you just do it because you just thought, right, this is what one does?
Well, I just did it because for the money, really, and also because it was in journalism. It was a tabloid magazine. My parents had both been, and my mum still is, journalists in Fleet Street, and so I'd grown up with this sort of inky fingered atmosphere. My mum worked at the Sun, the Daily Mail, and my dad worked at the Sunday Times, the Sunday Express. I mean, they worked with all the different newspapers. And so my brother and I sort of grew up with that in the background. And so I just enjoyed writing. I enjoyed English literature, enjoyed studying. But with this, I think maybe sort of growing up in the 80s, something to do with the pop music you're listening to. It starts with the Beatles, and then you listen to whatever it is, the punk bands. They gave me this idea of the Clash, about an idea of sort of anarchistic living, bohemian living. And then, when you're doing English A-level, you're exposed to the bohemian poets, of course, whether it's Blake or Wordsworth or Coleridge, and I quite enjoyed that sort of intellectual atmosphere at school where, we had these very sophisticated teachers who taught us about sort of fine wine and Piero della Francesca, and I thought, this is the world I want to be in, like literary, bookish, not a sort of money world. So I think it all sort of came from that, really. And so yes, when I got this job at the Sunday Mirror, one, I was like incredibly snooty about the kind of work I was supposed to be doing. I wanted to work on The Independent, something more highbrow. And but I mean, in actual fact, I should have kind of enjoyed it more because I look back on it. It was an incredible training for 2 years, a really sort of professional training at a very, very successful magazine that was selling, millions.
Yeah.
And had a very nice team. So it was okay. But yeah, but it did give me this kind of impetus to think, what's the point of all this education and university if you're just going to end up being miserable at age 23?
Yeah.
Doing a job you hate just for the money. I mean, there's got to be a better way than this.
Got it. Okay. So you were so it's like you've got two things going along side by side. One being the connection to freedom and everything that goes with that. And the other being just the love of the words and the learning and the literature and all of that. And that's what took you into that job, which then didn't meet the other side of you, which was interested in the actual experience of freedom, being free. But nevertheless, you got the training. So
yeah, it was exactly. It was good training, and it was good. It was excellent training. But to me, it wasn't really sort of creative enough because if like the other young people there, I wanted to do writing, but when you were given a writing job to do, it was sort of made up. I mean, it was good to practice tabloid writing because you have to write in a very, very clear way. There's no showing off. There's it's direct communication, and people go to journalism school to learn how to do this, and I was actually getting paid to do it, so I was sort of lucky. Alistair Campbell was the political editor of the Daily Mirror at the time.
Gosh.
Who I met once or twice, absolutely terrifying character. He was probably only about 30 then. And it was the last gasp of Fleet Street. They had an office in High Holborn, It's not there now. It's a bank or something. I don't know. So there was little elements of it that were fun, but really it wasn't creative enough for me. I wanted to do my own thing. I wanted to do what I wanted to write about, propose ideas for articles that I wanted to do, and also to edit my own magazine, which is something I've done before. I did it when I was 8. I had a magazine called The Penguin, and then when I was at school, I had a magazine called the King's House Times at my prep school. By this point, my parents had started to get posh, and they'd moved us from state school to prep schools because they started making money in Fleet Street. So I went to this Podseas prep school called King's House. So I started a magazine called the King's House Times, and then we did something called the Sixth Form Rag, and with a cassette machine that they had at the school. And it's the same thing. I was making a magazine with a friend, selling it, printing it, interviewing people. I interviewed my history teacher, my English teacher. I went to see a gig, bow wow. We reviewed it in the magazine. So it was the same sort of stuff that I'm doing now. And then at university, a friend and I, again, a good mate, we collaborated on a magazine called Broadsheet together. We did 3 or 4 of those. And so I sort of missed that work at the Sunday Mirror. And then also my friends from the skateboarding shop, they were doing their own magazines and fanzines. And they were so creative. They didn't have jobs. They ran nights. They were DJs. They had T-shirt companies. And they were a kind of a really nice mix of creative and entrepreneurial. And that's what I wanted to do. So I didn't really want the sort of full-time job that my degree and stuff had been leading towards, My contemporaries from Oxbridge, some of them, it's the kind of, they go through the motions at Oxbridge, and then they get a job as a lawyer or a banker, and when they get to my age, they're retiring and they're kind of living in a £10 million house in Notting Hill or whatever it is. But that wasn't really my path. It wouldn't have, it wasn't for me at all. I wanted to make things, and that's what I did naturally. And so I did. And inspired by 2 things, I suppose. On the one hand, I had this quite academic education, having done English at Cambridge, and I really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed the reading. And on the other hand, we had this influence from the skateboarders, who were very creative, as I said, entrepreneurial, really good fun, stylish, cutting edge. Could I bring those 2 things together into a magazine? And that's where the idea for The Idler came from. A sort of anarchistic literary magazine that helped people to live more fulfilled lives. And that's what we're still doing now.
Fantastic. Well, that's quite a bold thing to do, really, isn't it? Because you had a job and then you went, I'm going to go and do my own. Did you?
No, it wasn't that bold. It wasn't that bold. So I was sacked. No, I didn't really have much choice. So, and if I hadn't been sacked, I might still be there with the Sunday Mirror magazine.
Why do you sack? Or is that private?
No, it's not private. It was around the time that Maxwell fell off the boat. I don't know if you remember that story. And the Daily Mirror, Sunday Mirror, was owned by Robert Maxwell. And I think that was an excuse, but they were just sort of cutting back on people, and the deputy editor said, but there was one time someone accused me of stealing some wine from the office, which is really unfair because I'd been given it by a PR. And so it was like there was something a bit weird, something a bit dodgy about the whole thing. Anyway, it was good to get out of it, but then I was just on the dole, and I was how old? I don't know, 23 or 24. But then I thought, look, let's just get on with this magazine idea that's been percolating in my mind. And I approached a very good friend. There's a very good principle in these things, which is, I think, what would you do if you had £1 million? And go and do it anyway.
Yes, I like that one.
And it's sort of magical thinking. And I kind of picked it up from people like the KLF, who were the band, the sort of duo in the 90s, who had some really big hits. And then they burned £1 million. And that was a famous story. And I always looked up to them. I thought they were very interesting artists. And so I guess we'll just do it, just get on with it. And I went on a course for Doleys in Portobello Road for people on the dole who want to start their own business. And And the guy there said, look, just get on with it. And so we raised a few £100 from friends and family, £800. My friend Gavin had an Apple Mac. He was a designer, but also we've been in a band together at school, so we enjoyed working together. And we did it for 14 years. It was absolutely fantastic. But yeah, we didn't really have any money. I mean, I suppose I wasn't exactly going to starve, but we didn't, another magazine that started at the time, Loaded, which was much more successful, obviously, than the Idol, but although folded. They had millions of pounds to start with. It was started by a big publishing company, and we were just doing it on a fanzine level, just printing 1,000 copies and trying to get it out there. But it was enormously liberating to do that, to be able to do your own thing, your own magazine. It was great, and I've been doing it ever since. I was 25 when we did the first issue. For the first 14 years, my partner was my friend Gavin, and then Gavin left, and now I work with Victoria, my common law wife and mother of my 3 children. So we have a partnership. We work together. I think that's also nice. Is another KLF comment is that it's a little known fact that your best mate is a genius. So I think it's really good to, personally anyway, I look back, I've always worked with one other person, whether it was Philip Woodford, Alistair Oates, Gavin Predapini, Victoria Hull, James Parker. Often I tended to end up in a partnership of 2 people, putting something together, creative. A band's always got 4, but generally there's been a like a Lennon and McCartney sort of situation. Not to big myself up, of course, but I think that seems to come naturally. Yeah, so that was the idea. It was a sort of way of finding freedom for oneself. Can you make a living out of doing the thing that you want to do? Well, yes, but it's not easy. Victoria and I have had some really, pretty tough times financially speaking.
Yes. But I suppose the thing about can you make a living doing what you want to do? As you say, the answer is yes, but no one's going to necessarily pat you on the head and say, well done for doing the thing you want to do. Here's a lot of money.
No.
You're going to have to do the work.
Yeah, you do. You have to put the work in.
But one could say that all the important things in life, you have to do the work,
Yeah, and I think, Lennon and McCartney, we were talking the other day, and I think the Beatles is quite a good business model.
Is it really? Go tell me more about
Well,
that.
it sounds like a silly thing to say, but the Beatles, maybe not their Apple phase, because that wasn't so successful. But the idea of the kind of work ethic that the Beatles had, which was, Paul McCartney would say we called it a play ethic, or, we said we've had a hard day's play. So can you do something where you're, it's really, it's hard work making an album, as the Beatles. It's not easy, but it's what they've chosen to do. It's not easy putting a magazine together necessarily, but it's kind of enjoyable. I don't mean enjoyable in the sense of just sort of sitting by a swimming pool with a cocktail, but enjoyable in the sense that, you put yourself through something difficult, like picking up a pen, getting out of bed, starting to write a book. It's incredibly difficult to write, at least to get going. But you keep going because that's what you want to do. And then at the end of it, you come out with some kind of creative object. And then, you hope that other people will get something out of what you've done, and it'll bring them some sort of joy and liberation. And that's what we want to do with the Idol. That's what the Beatles did on a slightly bigger scale,
and in a slightly less obvious way.
But that sort of joyfulness and philosophizing actually in the Beatles lyrics. There's a lot of lyrics about taking it easy, not having a job. And this comes back again and again in pop music. A lot of Oasis songs that actually take the theme of the pleasures of being lazy, as do romantic poems.
Yeah.
So it's it's an old-fashioned theme. It's in ancient poetry. It's in Virgil. He praises the life of the shepherd who just sits around, playing his flute all day and sort of lying under a tree. The praise of leisure, I think, is a common artistic theme.
Yes.
Whether it's pop music or poetry. Anyway, so these are some of the things that get sucked into the magazine. And yes, it's certainly not easy. I wrote a book actually called Business for Bohemians. One of the things that Victoria and I did that was perhaps less successful in terms of business anyway, was to open and run a bookshop. Well, this is typical us, we don't really fancy getting a job, so but we like fulfilling these fantasies. So we thought, well, let's open our own bookshop. That sounds fun. And we'll do lots of events, and it'll be a kind of non-stop salon, and we'll sort of make something happen in London. Well, we did. We got incredible publicity. It was busy most evenings, and we had some incredible events. But the everyday of running a shop, a small business like that with 2 or 3 staff, it was really all consuming, and in the end was not going to produce anything like I think the 4th or 5th year we sort of paid ourselves less and less each year.
Yeah.
And so, the flip side of what I'm talking about is that, my friend Charles Handy, he's just recently died. He was a kind of management guru.
I know who he is. Yeah.
Yeah, he's brilliant. And he's one of my heroes. And he had this idea, you should. He was maybe addressing himself at very much at the upper middle class people, but you can get a job in a big company for a few years and then quit, start your own business, and that could be a very fulfilling way to live. You'll have less money perhaps, but he said that the problem for a lot of people, which is true, that they follow his advice. And you end up with sort of grinding poverty combined with very, very long hours. And I remember thinking, hang on, now, when I started the Idler, the idea was the precise opposite of that. Short hours and loads of money, So we closed the shop after a few years and then relaunched the business. We launched the magazine actually, because the magazine had basically vanished. And it's going well now. We take people on retreats and holidays. We have a festival. We do online events, and we're publishing 6. Actually, this year we're going to publish 7 magazines. I'm also writing books. So, to me, it's the absolutely ideal life. So it's just sort of scarcely credible, but it's not easy as well.
Well, one thing that strikes me in your sort of description of that journey to now, is the way you've sort of periodically just noticed when something isn't it and moved on from it, whether that's by someone sacking you. And of course, when one is sacked, sometimes one can look back and realize that, maybe one could have made sure one wasn't sacked, or maybe one really actually wanted to leave.
Exactly. I think I wanted to be sacked, really. No, I was one friend of ours says people sack themselves, they really do. They sort of, I must have been giving off really bad vibes. I'm sure I was. And there's another example of that too, actually, Catherine, because I think that's true. At another point, I escaped very, very well paid work, which was also a bit of an odd thing to do. So, the magazine was noticed by the marketing staff at the Guardian, and you were
very afraid.
Well, it was a good time to be at the Guardian in the mid-90s, and Gavin and I have actually got a job there, and we had our own team of people working on special projects. So we were suddenly in charge of this team of about 10 or 15 people, meeting the editor, proposing sections and stuff like this. We then quit that and set up our own agency. And we had 3 or 4, I now look back, very lucrative years, especially for someone in their late 20s, We were earning absolutely loads from doing advertising campaigns for Channel 4 and Sony PlayStation, magazines and things like this, which was really fun. But after 3 or 4 years, I said to Gav, I can't do this anymore. It's because really actually quite depressing because, again, I'm not really doing, this is me personally. It's just this feeling of having clients and not doing the thing that you wanted to do. So I wanted to write books at this point. So I said to Gav, look, I know this sounds mad, but can we quit all this advertising stuff for a year and take a sabbatical? Because I want to write this book, How to Be Idle, for which I did have a commission from a publisher, from Penguin. So Gav said fine, and then he had the idea of writing a book about clouds. Now we both wrote these books, and they both did really well actually. Okay, we're not earning the same amounts that we were earning in the late 90s doing our ad agencies, but we were really happy to have quit that stage. Yeah, so that was another one. That was another weird thing. And Victoria and I moved out of London. We rented out our house in West London, and we rented a farmhouse, a really dilapidated farmhouse on the North Devon coast in the middle of nowhere, with a field, a paddock, a vegetable patch. And we had chickens, pigs, and had 12 years of attempting at kind of a small holding type good life situation. My fantasy was write books in the morning, chop logs in the afternoon. And that's sort of more or less what happened. And that was another fun stage. We had our 3 children there. Well, we had one there. The 2 others were born in London, but obviously came down. And then again, another change. Hang on, this shop. Let's close it.
Yeah.
We did 4 or 5 years, and then we were back to London. So that was another big change, and quite a drastic one. But it was sort of, I think anyway, a good one. Certainly was good for our kids because they like growing up in London.
Yeah.
And it was actually quite, for me anyway, I really enjoyed being back in, society sort of thing, having retired from it. So it's this sort of Tolstoyan thing, do you retire from society and live in a kind of rural seclusion and grow your own vegetables and be free that way? Because that's one traditional path for freedom finding, and that was the idea of the smallholding, that you could grow some of your okay, I'm not saying we grew a lot of our, but we did stuff. We had a little bits of self-sufficiency. That's fun, that's interesting. It's also supposedly anyway saves money on your groceries, so in a smallholding you could cut down your need for work in the external world because you can provide for more of your needs without cash at home. That was anyway what we were trying, and it was, again, that's not easy either. And then, in Tolstoy, there's always this sort of battle. Do I retire, or do I sort of... I just read a short story where, where the hero's wife in Tolstoy, much younger wife, loves this rural seclusion, the kind of trad wife situation. But then, she wants to go to Moscow and St. Petersburg and go into society and get fancied by princes, and which does happen. So which do you like? I don't know. I think everyone would like a bit of both, wouldn't they? But
Yeah, I was talking about this the other day with somebody and saying, the ideal is to be in a rural place where it's completely secluded and quiet, but within walking distance, there's all the shops you might want,
yeah,
and restaurants and cafes,
yeah,
but they're not full of tourists.
right, yeah, and they're not full of well, let's say, if you're in somewhere like North Devon, not everybody agrees with your politics.
Oh, well, indeed.
And so you might have some interesting conversations in the pub. And yeah, I mean, it was good. It sort of it got me out of the sort of liberal elite bubble, if you like. And we made some good mates. But on the other hand, maybe you're sort of, it's quite nice to be with your own sort of tribe and gang back in town. I suppose what you're talking about was the idea of suburbia, really. So you could sort of have both, couldn't you? So you could go into town for work and play, but then retreat to your sort of semi-detached house in Norwood with a garden. My parents grew up in, I grew up in Richmond. I think that was their idea. We had Richmond Park. That was incredible. A lovely big park for loads of people who don't know what I'm talking about.
Yes.
On the edge of London, which was Henry VIII's hunting ground, I think. And I think it's the world's largest walled park. And it's full of deer, rabbits, and it's just a brilliant playground. The cars have to drive really, really slowly. So that was, Richmond's quite a good mix. But you're actually quite a long way from central London.
Yeah.
What do you think? And then, do you want to go live in Totnes or something? that's, sort of relatively sophisticated. And so lots of fun people around there.
There are a lot of fun people around Totnes and
Yeah, yeah.
bonkers people around Totnes, and
Yeah,
a lot of them are the
right.
same people.
Yeah.
So I went to my first dance camp at Totnes,
Wow.
which was great.
Yeah.
Some of my friends went to what's that school down there,
Dartington.
Dartington.
Yeah, yeah.
They're not normal, but they are very well adjusted, but they're not normal. That
No,
makes
no.
any sense.
Well, it was, it's a Bohemian Centre. Aldous Huxley had connections with Dartington. I think he sent his son to school there.
Yeah.
Him having gone to Eton. And I'm personally very attracted to all that stuff. I like the old ways too, and traditional ways. Teaching grammar and Latin, sort of a mix of all this stuff. I don't know. I suppose you got to sort of find out what's best for you. But I think a lot of people are suffering from. People. It's depressing being caught in the wrong situation.
Yeah.
I'm doing a lot of reading of the Stoics at the moment because I'm writing a book about them, and they're very much kind of, it's all in the mind. So it's your own judgments that make things bad, and they take it to these incredible extremes. You can be happy even if you're being tortured on the rack. You can be happy even if your daughter dies at the age of 12. And happiness comes from within, not from external things. It's quite a powerful philosophy. They also have this very powerful idea of being indifferent to things. And I think that's a good idea. There are certain things that aren't good or bad. You're just indifferent to them. Riches, status, okay, fine. I don't mind it, but I'm not going to rely on it for my inner happiness. It could get taken away tomorrow, which does happen for riches and status and so on and so forth. But they don't really. I think they don't put enough emphasis on the fact that a lot of people really are stuck in some pretty horrific situations, not of their own making. That's called the system, and it can be quite hard to escape from it. And it's very depressing for people when they're stuck in the wrong job because they need the money. I mean, look at the sort of mental health statistics in US and UK. It gets worse. So that's really what we're talking about. Is and for the idler, it's the system, it's the work system. I think is a lot to blame. So, I mean, going back to the Stoics, my dad was part of a really nice group of Indian meditation society group called the Brahma Kumaris, and they're very much about you can be happy. But they don't say quit your job. They say you could be happy. Should I just pause that? Wait for the phone to go. Sorry about that. Okay, we'll let the answer then get it. And this is a really difficult subject to think about. My father's meditation group, they say that you can be happy even in a job that you don't like. It's your own attitude that has to change. So when I was at the Sunday Mirror magazine, my dad said, well, maybe you need to be more generous to them and work harder at the job. And I was like, no, I just don't like this, and I'm going to be resentful and a bad employee. And then I was sacked.
Well, you got what you wanted.
Well, I did, yeah, and and I was much happier to be out of that situation. So I think sometimes you can be in a situation. Actually, towards the end of my job at the Guardian, I was much less happy, and I went to a therapist. Something else happened. I had a bereavement. A very good friend died. He was only 32, and it was horrific for all of us, for a lot of his friends. And a terrible time for it to happen. A brilliant young person, and that really threw me into a massive depression for some months. And the Guardian sent me to a therapist, which was amazing. I mean, they're really such a good employer. The woman who sent me to the therapist was called Carolyn McCall. She went on to be the boss of EasyJet and is now the boss of ITV. She was an amazingly good boss. And the therapist said, well, I think you need to quit your job. And so I did. So the Guardian paid for me to go to a therapist that told me to quit the Guardian.
That's not the first time that's happened.
No, it's not the first time.
I've heard that story many times.
Right, okay, yeah.
I've also been the coach who has been involved. I'm not a therapist, but I've worked as a coach for many years. I've often been the person where someone is encouraged to come and see me to help them transform their work experience, and the result has been they've gone and opened a bistro in Greece.
Really? Yeah, that's basically what happened to us. Yeah. So and she said, well, I think you're too unconventional for this sort of job. Even at the Guardian, which was an exemplary employer. I can't fault them at all. It was an amazing time to be there. There were fantastic people to work with. But there's always going to be somebody in the office that you don't really get on with, you've got to put up with, and all that sort of thing. So for me, it was better to get out of it and not have a boss or be one's own boss.
Mm. I'm just really struck by how you've been kind of guided, to whatever extent it's been conscious along the way, by following the path that seems to be most liberating. And giving it a good try, and then if it turns out not to be, then going, this isn't it, I'm going to stop doing it.
We're going to stop doing it. It is the different paths of liberation. I mean, I think Victoria and I thought that having your own bookshop was going to be quite so liberating. It turned out to be quite a tie, actually. And it was certainly making it difficult for me to write a book or do my own journalism. I did manage to write a book about it called Business for Bohemians. So the idea of that book was really to look at the problems that we'd had in our shop and pass them on to other people, staff, spreadsheets, accounts, marketing, all these things that you have to do if you do want to be free. And so you the idea. So you don't want a job. No, I hate my job. Well, okay. So what do you want to do? I want to be free. I want to do what I want to do. I want to get loaded and I want to have a good time. Yeah, but how are you going to earn some money? Well, I'm going to, I don't know, I'm going to open a bookshop. So, okay, but you realize if you open a bookshop, that's in a way harder than the job, because the job, you get the monthly salary, it has tax taken off it. All you have to do really is turn up. If you end up with something like The Guardian, they can barely sack you. I mean, I've got friends who've been there for about 30 years. They just move from one place to another. So that's quite secure, so do you really want to quit that security? And if you do want to make money, then you have to sort of become some kind of businessman or salesperson, in most cases, because writing books, even when I wrote my first book, which was in 2003, and it was published in 2004, I mean, I did absolutely nothing as far as the marketing went, really. I just did what I was told, and they had a good marketing. I was lucky because we had them published in The Guardian, and that sort of gave it a really good kind of kick at the beginning. But now I would feel like I had to do a lot of marketing, and so you realize that the people who are doing really well in their creative fields are also the ones who are very good at the business side, e.g. Paul McCartney, Noel Gallagher, whoever it might be. And it's quite a rare, Damien Hirst, it's quite a rare combination of skills. So the book was really to try and teach people who wanted to run their own small creative business, doing the thing that they enjoyed, a little bit about entrepreneurial skills, the skills that you need.
Yes. Great. Well, what a varied, extraordinary life. And do you now feel free in your life?
Yeah, I think there's different ways of looking at freedom, aren't there? Because there's this sort of existentialism which says, well, you are free already.
Yeah.
And existentialism encourages you to look at your life as a series of choices. Well, that might not be true in all cases. I'm not saying that someone who was sold into slavery to the Portuguese in 1650 could look at their choices. But, for a lot of people, this is true. And this is what Sartre, Camus, they were all on about. I mean, a simple example for me is people go, oh, I'd like to quit my job, but I've got this this massive mortgage. It's like, well, you talk as if someone imposed that on you from the outside, whereas you, with your free will, took that job, took that mortgage, had that child. Oh God, I'd like to, but I got all these school fees. You didn't have to pay the school fees. So I think existentialism is really good at that. And they say the liberated person has the weight of the world on his shoulders or her shoulders because they understand that they have made the choices in this world. Whereas the non-free blame everybody else for their predicaments, and say that things have been imposed on them, when in actual fact they've had a hand in choosing their own situations. That's what I understand by the kind of existentialism. So I think there's that whole thing, which is a sort of mental thing. And then there's, William Blake says that we have the mind-forged manacles. So you sort of half willingly submit to these methods of control. And there were sort of manacles in the mind. So that, in theory, means that, my friend Penny Rambo, who was one of the architects of Crash, the anarchist punk band, and was involved in all sorts of amazing countercultural movements, including the Stonehenge Free Festival, and Crash itself, and various other things, books, art, and lives on a small holding and has done since 1968. He said, theoretically speaking, the chairman of ICI could be more free in spirit than the hippie that you see meditating under a tree. I thought that's quite an interesting philosophical point, because that means it's about your attitude. So you could actually be a sort of banker, lawyer, whatever, and be perfectly free in spirit and mind, and not feel weighed down by your job. But I think it's like with the yogi point. Whereas someone else who's very self-consciously taken on the kind of outward appurtenances of, bohemianism or hippiedom or something like that, might actually be quite uptight. So it's not necessarily about how you look or what you do. It's a kind of mental attitude. But I still think it's more difficult to find that sort of freedom within a corporation. For me personally, anyway, it would be difficult to find that sort of freedom within a corporation. I'm happy kind of on the outside or the fringes.
Yeah.
So that's the sort of existentialist kind of freedom. And then there's the sort of everyday freedom to sort of, autonomy, the autonomy to decide what you're going to do each day. And that's almost like a kind of the Karl Marx idea of, I would like to criticize in the morning and hunt buffalo in the afternoon, and have a sort of varied life that, what I mean is, can you see your life as something that you personally can create, like a piece of clay, and you can see, decide what sort of life you would like, and then work to create that, which doesn't happen overnight. It might never quite happen, but you can sort of work towards it. That's another kind of freedom. And then, going back to Tolstoy, in his 50s, he was just so successful. And he had this lovely family and lots of children. He was rich. He was worldwide famous. He'd written some incredible novels. He was also very good, because, there'll be novelists of the same period who we've now forgotten, but Tolstoy is still read today. And he was incredibly miserable and depressed. That's interesting. Elton John as well. I don't know if you've read Elton John's Me, his autobiography.
I haven't, actually.
It's a fantastic read. I highly recommend it. He wrote it with a journalist. He's a very, very good writer. It's really funny. It's very, it's candid. It's kind of unassuming. He takes the piss out of himself all the way through. And, he was 28. His records were selling more than Elvis and the Beatles. He was at number one. He was singing to, I don't know, 50, 100,000 people. It's just unbelievable. Had all the money you could think of, incredible freedom. And he said this in the book, and then he said, so why was it that I stuffed a load of Valium down my face and jumped into the swimming pool in a kind of suicide attempt? So there's something, these things that we think we want, even when you get them. There are so many examples of that. It's a truism to talk about it. Like Graham from Blur, we interviewed him all through the 90s. He was thoroughly miserable. What, you've got everything that young person could ever want. You're a pop star. That's the absolute ideal life, Why on earth are you grumbling about this, And it wasn't that fun, he said. So I think the Stoics are right, really, when you go around looking at all these different aspects of freedom. It does sort of come from within, but the external things are also important. I don't think you should just put up with things like treated like shit or, in a bad job. If your personal circumstances, your personal circumstances may be contributing to making you unhappy. It's not just your reaction to them. So I think freedom is some kind of mix of those two things. Your actual everyday living situation, but also a sort of mental attitude. The other thing about the Stoics is, I mentioned this doctrine of indifference. I think that's quite a fun idea. So if someone annoys you during the day, I mean, I get annoyed on my bicycle by other drivers and other bicyclists.
Yeah.
But I sometimes say to myself, I am supremely indifferent to his taunts, or something like that. The word was adiaphora. Adiaphora means free from difference. And talking about freedom, the Stoic words were all about freedom from something. So ataraxia is freedom from disturbance, like a kind of Buddhist idea of tranquility. And they had apatheia. Now we get the word apathy, but for them it meant freedom from emotion, freedom from passion. Patheia meant passion or emotion. So freedom from this sort of overwhelming feeling that you want to go and kill somebody who has, in revenge, like Medea kills her babies in revenge for Jason or whoever it is being unfaithful. That's the kind of the passion you want to be free from, because it's pretty destructive. And love might be one of those too. So they say apatheia is a really key part of happiness, to be free from this sort of turbulence. And it's something that you gradually get better at through work. It doesn't just sort of happen. And people like Socrates and Diogenes the Cynic, they were kind of free from these things. And Diogenes and Socrates also, both of them, who are constantly praised by all the Greek philosophers. Socrates and Diogenes were the ultimate in sort of wise people. They rejected work, they rejected consumerism, they rejected even clothes. Diogenes rejected family. He didn't even have a house, supposedly. Lived in a barrel. Didn't have any.
How can you live in a barrel?
Well, he lived like a dog. So he was a Cynic philosopher. It wasn't actually a barrel. It was called a pythia. It was a sort of upturned wine cask. So if you can imagine in ancient Greece, like a gigantic wine cask.
Yeah.
As it turned on its side. There are paintings of him. There are paintings of this. The Renaissance painters imagined him doing this. It was a piece of performance art, really. He was making a statement. He was saying, look, you're running around, you idiots, in ancient Athens, scurrying around with your slaves, trying to make more money, with your kind of silver goblets and so on. You don't need this shit. Look at dogs. Dogs just sleep in the street. He masturbated in the street. He gate crashed parties. He was the ultimate example of free speech. He could tell Alexander the Great to get out of his light, because he was completely free, and he felt like a lord of all he surveyed, like a king. He was homeless, but he had no attachments. And this was, the Romans, the Greeks, and later philosophers, they loved Diogenes the Cynic. They thought he was just an incredible example of humanity. So brave. Not that we would all do that. But, he's a bit Christ-like. Christ didn't have any possessions, was barefoot, so on, had a long beard, cloak, The Greek philosophers invented that. So they have lots of things to say about freedom, and it was a key issue for them because, of course, they had slavery. They had slaves. But they were trying to be free from these different things. Anarchy means free from authority. Like monarchy is one single ruler. Anarchy is freedom from authority or against authority. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you smash up the state, but it might mean something like some kind of self-rule, which was another key philosophical concept of the Stoics. So what was it called? They had a Greek word which I now forget, but it meant autarkia. Autarkia was self-rule. So that's kind of what we all call being self-sufficient. You can sort of snap your fingers at authority, and sort of say what you like, and be free. These things are so current now, aren't they? With the idea of free speech. But free speech free speech wasn't like Elon Musk. If the richest man in the world abuses someone on Twitter, that's not free speech. That's bullying. Free speech was directed upwards. It was the philosopher to the tyrant. It was the fool in the court of the king who was allowed to tease him and say what he really, really, really believed. Most people won't say what they really believe to someone in power who's rich, because they depend on them for their patronage. But Diogenes could truly speak freely because he didn't take any money from anybody. He didn't take any money from any patron or king or from the public, because he wasn't a merchant or a businessman. So merchants, they said, can't really speak freely, business people, because they have to kind of curry favor with the public. They kind of lie. And anyone who had sort of clients or patrons, had to kind of fawn to them. And anyone who gets along in a court, like an MP, can't really speak freely. MPs can't really speak freely because they have to toe the party line, So years ago, someone said, "Oh, you should be an MP, go into Parliament and start the Idless Party and introduce, more bank holidays, which would be a good idea." But that would be far too compromising for me anyway. God, I admire the politicians because they give so much, actually. But being selfish and lazy as I am, it's better to kind of stay on the outside.
Well, yes, no, but you're making your contribution in your particular way.
Yeah, so Victoria and I, we're making our contribution with the creative products that we sort of put out there, and I have to say that what is amazing is that we get so many nice letters and emails from readers, and that keeps us going because that's just incredible. I was saying to Victoria this morning, there's some Notting Hill bankers that then get people emailing them saying, "Thank you so much. You've transformed my life for the better. I'm really grateful for all the work that you and Victoria do. It's been amazing. Keep going." We get those all the time, and it's absolutely fantastic.
Well, that shows that you're actually hitting the spot in some regard for people, So
For some people, it'd be good if there was more of them.
yeah, of course. Well, and maybe there will be after this episode. So,
Philby, thank you so much for helping me get the word out there.
it's my complete pleasure, because I think the idea is brilliant, and I love your newsletters that you send out, and also just to remind everyone, it's the magazine, it's the letters, it's the online evening gatherings. Oh yes, the new one.
The magazine. So it's a book. So 6-7 times a year, we're producing a lovely book with beautiful design all the way through. It has interviews. This one has an interview with Rowan Williams, the former Archbishop of Canterbury, and Jesse Armstrong, who wrote Succession, the TV show. And they're talking about the 7 deadly sins. I mean, that's fascinating.
It is.
We got Paul Theroux, who's the travel writer, who's brilliant. Arthur Smith is the contributor. Stuart Lee does the music, or at least he used to. It's a great magazine. It's great fun to do. And the newsletter, that's free. So that's entry level idling.
Entry level, yes.
Yeah, it doesn't cost anything, and you can just go to our website, sign up for it.
But also you offer courses as well.
Yes, and then we have what we call the Idler Academy. So that sprung out of our shop, actually. So in our shop we had some fairly eccentric range of activities that we taught. It could be Latin, ukulele. We had a choir. We do history lessons in business, and coming up, for example, we have Ian Wilson, the historian. He's done a really lovely course for us on Tolstoy. Hence my interest in Tolstoy at the moment. Kath Kidston is coming up. She's going to be doing a sort of bohemian business course. Kath Kidston sold her business for bazillions and has now started another small business. And she's a very brilliant person. We have Matthew Green. Anyway, there's all sorts of they're philosophical. We teach you about the ancient philosophers, about writers. There's a singing course, there's a dancing course, because I think merrymaking is a really important part of life. There's over 80 of these online courses now that we have. So it's like your own mini YouTube with no ads.
Exactly. And it has some class to it, if you don't mind me saying. You know, there's kind of different layers and depths in what you're doing. It's not just about being entertaining, and it is entertaining. You know, it's not just about being philosophical, and it is philosophical. So it combines a whole number of things together pleasingly, you know, which I think is brilliant. And I will mention as well the festivals and the retreats that you do, which is like a chance to be part of this amazing kind of club of these interesting people. So I do really
Yeah, that's great too. Yeah, Victoria does those.
And so go to idler.co.uk, everybody, and you'll be able to, and also your books. Are those also mentioned on your website?
Somewhere, yeah, there was How to Be Idle, I think you mentioned, and then How to Be Free. I wrote a book about parenting, the idle parent. So that was telling parents to kind of back off a bit. I'm part of an over-parenting generation, I think.
Right.
And I wrote a book about living on the small holding. That's called Brave Old World, and we published that as How to Live in the Country. There was Business for Bohemians, and then where are we? At the end of this year, I think. I hope my Stoics book will be coming out, so keep a lookout for that too.
Fantastic. Well, that's very exciting. So I want to ask you a couple more things before we wind up, because otherwise we're going to run out of time. I always like to ask my guests if there is something that you would like to say to people who, you know, like you, are trying to be part of making things better in the world and who are identified in some way as leaders. You know, you're a leader in the way that you are. I'm a leader in the way I am. There are other people with more sort of formal, official leadership roles. So I just wondered, is there something you'd like to say? Because some of those people listen to this podcast. Is there something you'd like to say to some of us who are trying to be part of the solution?
Well, I mean, I have to say more idling, because I think it's such a powerful idea. Because idling for me, it's where the ideas come from. It prevents you from overworking. It prevents you from being overtired. It's pleasurable. It's where you do the philosophizing. So creating a life where you do have a reasonable amount of leisure, which is what Socrates advised. It's incredibly important, particularly if you're in a leadership role. People burn out so easily. I've seen it happen in these sort of protest movements and things. People just overdo it. It's quite exciting, and they work too hard. I'm sure you've seen that too, and it's just a real danger to work too hard, and you don't think properly. You don't think clearly. Mistakes and accidents actually happen. I think the overwork of the world is actually an enormous scandal. I follow the UN statistics on work, the International Labour Organization. Something like 3 million people a year die directly as a result of their job. And that dwarfs the number of people who die from war. It absolutely dwarfs the number of people who die from alcohol and drugs. They are tiny by comparison. They're big, but they're like hundreds of thousands, not millions. So I think that's actually quite scandalous. And a lot of these jobs are horrific jobs that fund our lifestyles in the West. They're people working in mines and in dangerous situations. They're dying young. Anyway, so if you've got the opportunity, I think on a personal level, we need to campaign for more idling in our own lives. We also need to campaign for more idling on a social level out there. So that's just very simply what I would say to people. Give yourself more idling time.
Brilliant. And we've talked about quite a lot today, and it's been really fascinating, actually. I'm looking forward to listening back to it. Has there been a favourite part of our conversation today for you, Tom?
Well, I'm a really awful person because I just like the sound of my own voice. So as long as I'm gabbling away, I'm happy. But probably my favourite bits are when I'm hearing a bit more insights from you, because I know what I think generally about things. No, it's all the same to me. It's all been brilliant. Thanks so much.
My pleasure. Well, when you start your podcast, I'll very happily come on as a guest if you ever start a podcast.
Excellent. Yeah. One podcast to another. We must help each other out.
Exactly. And just final question then. Is there some sort of reflection question that you'd like to leave the listeners with that they can reflect on over the week that might help them connect more with freedom and idling?
A reflection question, a question on which to reflect.
Indeed.
Well, I think, probably to open with your probably to go back to your opening comments, is to think about what is freedom, and do you want it?
Yeah. Brilliant reflection question. So thank you very, very much, Tom. This has been fantastic. And that's all for Truth and Transcendence. You can find our other episodes on truthandtranscendence.com. Be sure to give us a thumbs up, a 5-star rating, and share with your friends. Have a great week, and I'll see you next time. Thank you, Tom. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. It really helps if you give a thumbs up, a 5-star rating, a review, and share with your friends. If you're looking for transformational coaching or an intensive transformational weekend workshop experience, I can help with that. You can actually help the show by making a donation. Until next time, take care.